He warned them. He pleaded with them. He showed them the truth.
Do you not fear Allah?
Yet they mocked him, chased him, and chose an idol over their creator.
You run towards stone while turning away from the one who gave you breath.
And then one day, Prophet Ilyās vanished. No farewell, no recorded death, no grave known to the world. Only whispers, legends of ascension, and a shocking claim preserved in ancient narrations. A prophet so exhausted by disbelief that he asked Allah to take his soul. Was Prophet Ilyās taken alive? Did he truly disappear by divine command? Or is the truth far more profound and far more misunderstood? Tonight, we uncover the hidden story behind the disappearance of Prophet Ilyās alayhi salam. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps these stories reach hearts around the world. The land that once carried revelation had grown unfamiliar to faith. Bani Israel lived surrounded by altars, not prayers. Towers rose not to remember Allah, but to honor Baal, a name whispered with fear, power, and false hope. Fires burned before carved stone. Incense replaced sincerity, and slowly, almost unnoticed, Tawheed was pushed to the margins of life. This was not sudden disbelief. It was erosion. Generations before them had known miracles. They had seen seas split and tyrants fall. Yet comfort softened memory, and prosperity dulled fear of accountability. Worship became transactional. Rain, harvest, protection, these were no longer sought from Allah, but demanded from an idol said to control the skies. And so Baal was crowned where Allah should have been remembered. In that darkness, Allah chose Ilyās alayhi salam. Not a king, not a general, not a man backed by crowds, but a prophet with nothing except certainty. Ilyās did not arrive to a neutral people. He walked into a nation already convinced it had found its God. Baal was more than a statue, it was a system. Priests, rituals, festivals, authority. To reject Baal meant rejecting the social order itself. It meant standing against the powerful, the wealthy, and the comfortable. Yet Ilyās did not soften his words. He stood before them and asked a question so simple it cut deeper than any accusation. Do you not fear Allah? Not an argument, not a philosophical debate. A reminder of something they had buried. He called them back to the most basic truth, that the one who created them did not share his power with stone, that the rain they begged Baal for already belonged to Allah, that the heavens were not negotiated with through idols, but obeyed a single command. But the people did not hear guidance. They heard threat. Because when Tawheed returns, false gods tremble. Baal worship had promised control rituals that could be performed, offerings that could be calculated, gods that could be manipulated. Ilyās shattered that illusion. He reminded them that Allah is not managed, bargained with, or shaped to desire. Allah is obeyed. And that terrified them. So they mocked him. They called him extreme, isolated, out of touch with tradition. They accused him of disrespecting the ways of their fathers, even though their fathers had once worshipped Allah alone. Slowly, resistance turned to hostility. Whispers turned to plots. Why Ilyas? Because Allah often chooses the loneliest messenger for the most stubborn people. Ilyas was not sent to revive curiosity. He was sent to confront arrogance. His mission was not to blend in, but to stand alone when standing alone was the test. And he did. Day after day, he watched a nation choose comfort over truth. He watched prayers redirected to lifeless stone. He watched the remembrance of Allah fade into habit, then into silence. Yet he remained, until the weight became unbearable. This chapter of Ilyas's life is not just history, it is a mirror. It reflects what happens when belief is inherited but not protected, when idols no longer look like statues, and when truth becomes inconvenient. And it raises a haunting question that still echoes today. What does it cost a prophet to speak when no one wants to listen? The question was not shouted. It was not wrapped in anger or threat. It was spoken plainly, almost gently. Do you not fear Allah? With those words, Ilyas alayhi salam stood before a people who had forgotten how to tremble, not from weakness, but from arrogance, dressed as confidence. They lived beneath the sky, yet believed the sky obeyed Baal. They walked on land shaped by rain, yet credited stone for every drop. Ilyas did not accuse them first. He reminded them, "Fear not the fear of terror, but the fear that awakens the heart, the kind that humbles the soul before truth, the kind that once lived in their ancestors, before idols learned to speak louder than conscience." Then he asked what shattered the illusion completely. Do you call upon Baal and abandon the best of creators? It was a question with no escape. No philosophy could soften it. No ritual could answer it. Either Baal created them or Allah did. Either stone controlled life or the one who fashioned the heavens and the earth. And deep down, they knew. But knowing the truth does not mean accepting it. To accept it would mean admitting they were wrong, that their festivals were empty, that their offerings were wasted, that their power rested on a lie. So instead of responding, they hardened themselves. Silence turned into mockery. Mockery turned into rejection. Ilyas stood alone. Not alone because Allah had abandoned him, but alone because truth is often carried by one voice when crowds choose comfort. Around him were priests dressed in authority, leaders bound to Baal's favor, families raised on inherited falsehood. No army, no followers, just revelation against routine. And routine is stubborn. He spoke again, reminding them who Allah truly is, not distant, not symbolic, not limited. Allah was their Lord, the Lord of their fathers. The one who existed before Baal had a name, before idols had a shrine, before lies learned how to decorate themselves as tradition. But their eyes could see idols and their hearts could not see Allah. This was not ignorance. It was blindness. A blindness that prefers gods it can touch over a lord it must obey. A blindness that chooses certainty in rituals over surrender in faith. They could walk to Baal's altar. They could see the fire, smell the incense, hear the chants. Allah demanded something far more difficult, submission without control. So they rejected Ilyas. The Quran captures it with a single devastating line: they denied him. No debate recorded, no counter-argument preserved, just denial. And with denial comes consequence. Allah declared that those who rejected the truth would be brought forth held accountable, except those few whose hearts remained sincere, the forgotten believers. The silent worshippers who never bowed to Baal, even when the world demanded it. Ilyas's message did not fail. It exposed. It separated truth from loyalty, belief from habit, sincerity from performance. And even when his people turned away, Allah honored him in a way denial could never erase, by preserving his name, his struggle, and his stand. Peace upon Ilyas. Not because his people followed him, but because he delivered the truth without compromise. And perhaps the greatest tragedy of this chapter is not that they rejected a prophet, but that they heard the question, "Do you not fear Allah?" and answered it with silence. Baal did not begin as stone. He began as an idea born in fear, fear of drought, fear of hunger, fear of losing control. In lands where rain decided life or death, people searched for something they could bargain with, something visible, something that promised power in exchange for obedience. And slowly, Baal became that promise. They said he commanded storms. They said he ruled rain and fertility. They said the skies listened to him. And when rain fell, they bowed. When crops grew, they sacrificed. When drought came, they feared him more. Baal was not worshipped because he was proven. He was worshipped because he was useful. Over time, usefulness turned into authority. Temples rose, priests gained influence, rituals became law. Baal was no longer just a god, he was an institution. To challenge him was not simply disbelief, it was rebellion against the social order itself. This is why Baal dominated the region. He offered certainty, predictable rituals, measurable devotion. If you offered enough, prayed enough, obeyed enough, you believed you could control the outcome. Rain became a transaction. Blessings became a payment. Faith became manageable. Allah, however, could not be managed. Allah demanded submission, not negotiation, trust, not leverage, obedience without guarantees. And for hearts addicted to control, that was terrifying. So Baal filled the gap. Kings aligned themselves with his priests. Leaders justified power through his favor. Festivals distracted the people while injustice hid behind celebration. The idol stood at the center, but behind it stood human hands benefiting, ruling, manipulating. Idol worship was never just spiritual corruption. It was political stability built on falsehood. When Ilyas, alayhi salam, called them to abandon Baal, he was not only challenging a belief, he was threatening livelihoods, authority, and hierarchy. If Baal fell, the priests lost power. If Baal was false, leaders lost legitimacy. If Allah alone was worshipped, no man could claim divine backing for oppression. That is why the resistance was fierce. Because Tawheed is dangerous to false systems. Baal worship shaped identity. Children grew up celebrating his festivals. Families built their lives around his seasons. To abandon Baal meant admitting generations had been deceived. It meant accepting that sacrifices were wasted, that prayers were unanswered, that fear had been misplaced. And pride could not accept that. So Baal remained armed, honored, defended. Images of him showed strength and dominance. He was depicted as a warrior god, a controller of chaos, a master of forces. This appealed to a people who admired power more than truth. They did not want a lord who humbled kings, they wanted a god who justified them. Allah's message through Ilyas was clear. Baal controlled nothing. Rain fell by Allah's command. Crops grew by Allah's mercy. Life and death belonged to the Creator, not to carved lies polished by ritual. But accepting that truth meant surrendering control, and surrender was the one thing Baal worshippers refused to do. So they clung harder. The idol stood because it was protected not by divinity, but by fear and benefit. And when a prophet stood before it and said, "This has no power," the system trembled. Because idols survive on silence. And Ilyas broke it. This chapter is not about stone statues of the past. It is about every system that replaces obedience to Allah with comfort, control, and convenience. Every time truth threatens power, a new Baal is raised. Different form, same lie, and abandoning it has always come at a cost. Truth does not disappear quietly. When Ilyas alayhi salam exposed Baal for what it was, the reaction was immediate. Not reflection, not repentance, rage. Because idols can tolerate ignorance, but they cannot survive exposure. What began as mockery hardened into threat. Words turned sharp. Faces once familiar grew hostile. The same people who smiled at festivals now whispered plans in shadows. The system Baal protected had been shaken, and systems strike back when they feel endangered. So, the prophet became a target. Not because he lied, but because he refused to lie. History repeats this pattern with painful consistency. Every prophet who stood against corruption was first ignored, then ridiculed, and finally hunted. Ilyas alayhi salam was no exception. He did not command armies. He did not have crowds to shield him. His only defense was certainty, and certainty is invisible to those who fear losing power. The threats grew closer, doors closed, paths narrowed, allies vanished, even silence became dangerous. And in that suffocating pressure, Ilyas realized what prophets before him had learned. There comes a moment when remaining among a people no longer serves guidance, it only invites destruction. So he withdrew, not out of fear of death, but to preserve the mission Allah had entrusted to him. Ancient narrations describe Ilyas retreating into isolation, hiding from those who sought his life. Whether in mountains or caves, the details vary, but the meaning does not. A prophet, driven from his people, alone with his Lord, cut off from the very nation he was sent to save. This is the loneliness of divine messengers. They carry truth meant for everyone, yet often walk alone. They speak words meant to awaken hearts, yet sleep in hiding. They are sent as mercy, yet treated as threats. Imagine the weight of that solitude. To watch a nation choose destruction knowingly. To warn them until your voice grows tired. To see miracles replaced by stubborn pride. And to realize that guidance, when rejected repeatedly, turns into judgment. Ilyas alayhi salam did not flee because he failed. He withdrew because the door had been slammed shut. And even in hiding, his heart remained tied to his people. He did not curse them lightly. He did not abandon them emotionally. He turned to Allah, not in anger, but in exhaustion. The exhaustion of a messenger who had delivered every word entrusted to him, only to see truth trampled again and again. This moment marks the shift, from open confrontation to quiet supplication, from public warning to private tears, from standing before idols to standing alone before Allah. The Quran does not record every detail of this withdrawal, and perhaps that silence is intentional, because some trials are not meant to be observed, they are meant to be endured. What matters is not where Ilyas hid, but why. He hid because corruption had declared war on truth. He hid because arrogance had armed itself. He hid because the mission had reached its breaking point. And in that hidden space, away from crowds, threats, and noise, something far more profound was about to happen. Because when a prophet is hunted by people, his refuge is never a cave. It is Allah. Silence surrounded him. No crowds, no threats, no idols towering over stone altars, only a prophet and his Lord. Ilyas alayhi salam did not raise his hands in fury. He did not curse a nation or demand vengeance. What rose from his chest was heavier than anger, it was heartbreak. The kind that comes when truth has been delivered without compromise, and rejection remains unmoved. He had warned them. He had pleaded. He had stripped falsehood bare. And still, they chose Baal. In that solitude, Ilyas turned inward, not outward. His supplication was not dramatic, it was honest, a conversation between a servant and his creator, carried by a heart worn thin by resistance. He asked Allah to relieve him from a people who no longer wanted guidance, to lift the burden he had carried alone for too long. This is where the weight of the moment must be understood. Prophets do not abandon missions lightly. Their lives are built around endurance. They are taught patience, trained in restraint, anchored by revelation. When a prophet reaches a point of asking for release, it is not despair, it is completion. Completion of effort, completion of warning, completion of responsibility. The narrations describe a plea that was not an escape from duty, but an acknowledgement that the door had been sealed by the people themselves. Guidance had been offered openly. Signs had been shown clearly. Hearts had been invited gently. And yet arrogance chose to remain. This is not the cry of weakness. It is the quiet acknowledgement of truth. Theologically, this moment carries immense gravity. A prophet's supplication is not driven by emotion alone. It aligns with divine wisdom. When Ilyas asked to be relieved, he was not rejecting life. he was surrendering outcome, placing the matter fully in Allah's hands, without attachment to results. And Allah hears the prayers that rise from sincerity. Some narrations speak of drought following this moment, of the heavens withholding rain as a reflection of hearts that withheld submission, not as cruelty, but as consequence. A mirror held up to a nation that demanded blessings while rejecting the one who gives them. Yet even then, Allah's mercy remained closer than punishment. Because the plea of Ilyas was not for destruction, it was for truth to be unmistakable, for hearts to feel what they had ignored, for certainty to return where arrogance had settled. And beneath all of it there was exhaustion. The exhaustion of speaking truth into deafness, of standing firm while being hunted, of watching falsehood rewarded and righteousness threatened. This is the side of prophethood rarely spoken of. The tears unseen, the nights unrecorded, the weight no crowd applauds. Ilyas did not ask for honor, he already had it. He did not ask for victory. Victory belongs to Allah alone. What he asked for was relief from a cycle that no longer served guidance. And in that request lies a profound lesson, that even the strongest faith feels pain. That sincerity does not erase loneliness. That devotion does not shield the heart from sorrow, but it transforms sorrow into supplication. The heavens do not shake because words are loud. They respond when hearts are true. And the supplication of Ilyas, spoken not in anger, but in heartbreak, marked the final turning point. Because once a prophet places his burden fully before Allah, what follows is no longer resistance. It is decree. After the supplication, the story does not end. It fractures. Because what followed Ilyas alayhi salam was not a clear conclusion but a mystery, a silence that invited imagination, a gap that people rushed to fill with wonder, fear, and legend. Some said he vanished. Some said he was taken alive. Some said death never touched him at all. And over time, the question grew louder than the man himself. Did Prophet Ilyas really disappear? Ancient reports began to circulate, stories passed from tongue to tongue, from generation to generation, narrations claiming he was lifted from the earth, that he still walked among the living unseen, that he met other righteous figures, appeared in distant lands, or returned during sacred times. These stories carried awe, but not certainty. Many of them came from Isra'īliyyāt accounts inherited from earlier religious traditions, not grounded in revelation, not confirmed by the Quran, and not authenticated through reliable chains. They entered books of history and tafsir, often quoted without endorsement, preserved as curiosities rather than truths. And yet, they captured the imagination. Because people struggle with endings. A prophet who disappears feels different from a prophet who dies. Disappearance suggests mystery, continuation, exception. It softens grief. It elevates myth. It allows the story to feel unfinished, alive. But Islam does not build belief on fascination. It builds belief on evidence. When scholars examined these narrations, the foundation began to crack. Chains were weak, links were missing. Reports contradicted one another. Some descriptions were exaggerated beyond reason. Others borrowed heavily from older traditions that blurred the line between reverence and legend. And most importantly, the Quran remained silent. No verse declares that Ilyas lives on. No authentic hadith confirms his survival, and Allah had already established a universal principle. No human was granted immortality before the Prophet ﷺ. That principle matters, because prophets are honored by truth, not by exception without proof. The belief that Ilyas never died did not spread because it was strong, it spread because it was appealing. It offered comfort, it offered mystery. It allowed people to imagine a prophet beyond time, beyond accountability, beyond the human end we all fear. But Islam calls us back to clarity. Many great scholars address this directly. They did not deny the greatness of Ilyas, but they refused to elevate speculation above revelation. They reminded the Ummah that loving prophets does not mean mythologizing them, and that exaggeration, even in admiration, leads away from truth. What remains most likely, based on evidence, not emotion, is that Ilyas lived, struggled, fulfilled his mission, and died as all prophets before him died. Not forgotten, not diminished, but complete. And perhaps the true disappearance was not of his body, but of certainty in people's hearts. When truth fades, stories rush in to replace it. When endings are painful, legends step forward to soften them. But the Quran does not invite us to chase mystery. It invites us to understand purpose. Whether Ilyas died quietly or left the world unseen is not the lesson. The lesson is why people wanted him not to die, why they needed the story to continue beyond accountability, why a nation that rejected him could later turn him into legend. Because sometimes it is easier to glorify a prophet from a distance than to obey him when he stands before you. And in separating legend from evidence, one truth becomes clear. The power of Ilyas was never in his disappearance. It was in the message he delivered fully, honestly, and without compromise. That message did not vanish, and it never needed mystery to survive. When the stories grew louder, the scholars grew careful. They did not rush to impress. They did not chase mystery. They did what they always did. They measured claims against revelation. Because in Islam, love for prophets is protected by discipline. Early scholars examined the reports about Ilyas alayhi salam with a steady hand. They gathered the narrations that claimed he never died, that he roams the earth unseen, that he meets other righteous figures at sacred times, and then they asked the only question that matters in sacred knowledge. Where is the proof? What they found was telling. Most of these reports traced back to Isra'īliyyāt stories, inherited from earlier traditions, passed through converts or storytellers, often without chains, often with contradictions. Some narrations conflicted with established Qur'anic principles. Others collapsed under basic scrutiny of their transmitters. Many were classified as weak, some were rejected outright, and none reached the level of certainty. The Quran, however, spoke clearly, without naming Ilyas specifically, but by establishing a rule that included him. No human was granted immortality. Every soul would taste death. Prophets were honored, not exempted, elevated, not mythologized. This mattered deeply to the scholars. Because once exceptions are accepted without proof, the door opens to distortion. Prophets become legends, legends become objects of exaggeration, and exaggeration quietly reshapes belief. So the scholars drew a line. They affirmed that Ilyas was a prophet of great rank, sincerity, and endurance. They affirmed that his struggle was preserved in the Quran. They affirmed that Allah honored him with lasting praise. But they refused to affirm claims that lacked evidence, no matter how popular those claims became. Some scholars addressed the issue directly, warning against confusing admiration with authentication. They reminded the Ummah that the absence of a known grave does not imply eternal life. That silence in revelation is not permission for imagination. That faith is not strengthened by mystery, it is strengthened by clarity. Others explained why such beliefs spread in the first place. People are uncomfortable with endings. They fear finality. They romanticize unresolved stories. A prophet who disappears feels closer, more accessible, less distant than one who dies. It allows people to imagine encounters, interventions, secret appearances. It gives hope without responsibility. But Islam does not operate on emotional comfort alone. It operates on truth. The methodology of the scholars protected that truth. They preserved narrations without endorsing them. They documented stories while labeling their strength. They separated what could be mentioned from what could be believed. And in doing so, they safeguarded the Ummah from slowly drifting into myth. This is not harshness. It is mercy. Because when prophets are elevated beyond revelation, their message is quietly replaced by fascination. And fascination never transforms hearts the way obedience does. The scholars understood something crucial. The honor of prophets lies in what they taught, not in what is imagined about them. Their lives are examples, not legends. Their deaths do not diminish them. Their humanity does not weaken their message. So, they concluded with restraint. Ilyas lived. Ilyas called to Allah. Ilyas endured rejection. Ilyas completed his mission. And like those before him, Ilyas returned to his Lord. No spectacle required. And, in that conclusion, Islamic scholarship did what it has always done best. It protected faith from exaggeration, love from distortion, and truth from becoming a story told only for wonder. Because revelation does not need mystery to remain powerful. It needs honesty. His voice fell silent. His footsteps faded. And yet his legacy never left. Prophet Ilyās alayhi salam did not remain in this world forever. But the truth he carried refused to die with him. Because messages anchored in sincerity do not depend on lifetimes. They endure beyond acceptance, beyond rejection, beyond memory itself. Ilyas was not remembered for crowds that followed him. He was remembered for standing when no one stood beside him, for calling to Allah when obedience was inconvenient, for refusing to soften truth even when isolation became unbearable. And in that, his story speaks to every soul that has ever felt unseen in daʿwah. He teaches us that guidance is not a transaction, that effort does not guarantee results, that sincerity may pass through a generation without applause and still be accepted by Allah. Ilyas called, warned, endured, and completed his task. The response of the people was never the measure of his success, because success was never in their hands. It was in Allah's. Burnout in daʿwah is rarely spoken about, but it is deeply human. The exhaustion of repeating truth to deaf hearts, the pain of watching falsehood thrive while righteousness is hunted. The loneliness of standing firm when compromise would make life easier. Ilyas felt that weight, and instead of collapsing under it, he carried it to Allah. That is the difference. He did not demand victory. He did not insist on legacy. He placed the outcome where it always belonged, in divine hands, and that act alone elevated him beyond numbers, beyond timelines, beyond visibility. His story also confronts a dangerous illusion that impact is measured by size. A prophet sent to an entire nation, yet followed by few. A message that shook the heavens yet was ignored on earth. A life that appeared unfinished yet was complete in purpose. This is not failure. This is obedience. Allah did not preserve the story of Ilyas to teach us how to win followers. He preserved it to teach us how to remain faithful when results disappear, how to trust Allah when guidance is rejected, how to stand firm without becoming bitter. The Quran honored Ilyas not with statistics, but with peace. Peace upon Ilyas, not because he changed his people, but because he refused to change the truth. That peace is a reminder to every believer who feels tired, unheard, or discouraged. Your responsibility is not to force hearts open. It is to speak with honesty, act with integrity, and surrender the outcome. Truth does not always triumph immediately. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it echoes quietly through generations. Sometimes it returns when the world is ready to listen. And sometimes its reward is not seen in this life at all, but Allah sees. The legacy of Ilyas lives in every soul that chooses truth over comfort, in every voice that speaks when silence is safer, in every heart that trusts Allah, even when the path feels empty. Because in the end, the story of Prophet Ilyas is not about disappearance. It is about devotion, not about numbers, but about truth. And truth, once spoken sincerely for Allah, never truly dies.